They said it was too cold for me. Mark didn't even meet my eyes when he said it. Just stood in the entryway tugging on that overpriced parka he wears like karma now, while Lana zipped up Zoe's coat and smiled a little too brightly. You know how it gets up there, Mom. Slick roads, no heating in the guest rooms. It's not a trip for someone your age. Someone your age. He said it like it was a fact, like I was a delicate wine glass left too close to the edge. Not the woman who once dug the driveway out with a cracked shovel because the plough hadn't come for 3 days. Not the woman who raised him through winters with no central heat and the draft that whistled through the seams of our little house. No, I was someone your age. A fragile inconvenience. Best left behind. We'll do something next year, Lana added, adjusting her designer boots. Something more accommodating. I nodded. Of course. The words felt stiff in my mouth, like frozen branches. But I smiled anyway. You learn, over time, that speaking too much when you're heard only invites soft apologies that mean nothing. Better to keep the silence. It reveals more. They left a tray of frozen casseroles on the counter and a note on a pink sticky, "Love you, Mom," back in the second. As if warmth could be folded into a doodled heart. I stood in the doorway as they backed out of the drive, waving like a proper send-off mattered when the rest didn't. The tartan scarf around my neck fluttered in the wind, the one James used to wear back when the cold never kept us from anything. The silence after the door shut was heavy. Not peaceful. Just empty. That night I had tea for dinner. Sat alone in the living room wrapped in a throw blanket no one asked if I'd need. Midnight arrived with a few faint pops of fireworks from some far-off celebration. No calls. No messages. Just the clock ticking and the sound of pipes sighing through the walls like even the house was tired of pretending I was still part of anything. The next morning I opened social media without knowing why. Maybe boredom. Maybe loneliness. Maybe a flicker of something I didn't want to name. Zoe's account was public. She's young. She doesn't yet know what to hide. The video auto-played. 10 seconds. Laughter. A cozy cabin. A stone fireplace roaring behind them. My granddaughter holding a mug of cocoa nearly as big as her face. Mark off to the side, cheeks red from the heat, not the cold. Lana in a robe, smiling. I blinked. Pressed replay. They weren't worried about ice. Or stairs. Or heating. The place looked like it belonged on the cover of a travel magazine, or rustic. Yes, but well appointed. A hot tub steamed in the background. There were at least 12 people in the room. 12. I counted twice. Then my eyes caught something small and sharp, like a pin through fabric. The blanket folded on the back of the couch. Not just any blanket. One I'd crocheted the year after James passed. Soft wool in deep pine green with a little gold thread woven through. I'd given it to Mark and Diana last Christmas. For the cabin, I'd said, "When you go up there." They said they didn't go anymore. That it wasn't winter ready. And there it was. Just behind Zoe's smiling face. I kept watching. Another photo. Another angle. This time, Zoe wore a scarf around her neck in Nivian grey, old-fashioned but familiar. James's scarf. The one he wore when he built that first snowman with Mark, when we still lived on Walnut Street. I hadn't seen it in years. I thought it had gone with his things tucked in a box no one had opened anymore. But there it was. Around a neck that didn't know the weight it carried. I zoomed in on the picture, not because I needed confirmation, I knew what I was looking at. But sometimes, when betrayal is quiet, you need to see it again to believe you didn't imagine it. They didn't forget me. They didn't think it was too cold. They lied. Not cruelly. Not even with malice. Just with a shrug. With the ease of people who are used to rearranging their comfort at the expense of your place in it. I didn't cry. Instead, I got up. Walked to the hall closet. Pulled out my coat. The good one. Heavy wool with deep pockets and buttons like coins. I wrapped James's old scarf around my neck and picked up my walking stick from the corner. Then I opened the travel app on my phone. The same one I used to book flights to visit him. This time I searched for something else. A cabin. By the same lake. Just outside of town. Lake view. Wood-burning stove. 2 nights. Just for me. It was available. I booked it. Then I sat down at the small desk by the window and pulled out a postcard from the drawer. one of the ones with the watercolour snow scene on the front. I'd bought it years ago and never used it. I wrote carefully. Heard it was too cold for me. Turns out it's beautiful here. No signature. No return address. I slipped it into my purse. And I packed. Not with grief. Not with shame. But with care. My boots. My gloves. A book of poems I hadn't opened in years. And the photograph of James taken on our first winter together, wind in his hair, cheeks pink, smiling at me like I was the only one he needed. I left the casseroles in the freezer and turned down the thermostat. Let the house be cold. I wasn't staying. It started, I suppose, with a staircase. Not a grand one. Just the 3 steps down into their sunken living room, the one Lyanna redecorated in creams and greys and accent pillows no one was allowed to lean on. I had barely stepped inside when she looked over my shoulder and said, gently, "Oh, Mom, maybe just stay in the kitchen. Those stairs are steep." I paused, still holding the casserole. I baked the kind with the buttery cracker topping, so we always liked. Mark didn't say anything. He was fiddling with the Bluetooth speaker, trying to sync it to his phone. Lyanna smiled like she was offering a kindness, not a boundary. "We just don't want you to trip." "I won't trip," I said, setting the dish down carefully on the counter. "I've walked those stairs before." "Yes, Bubble." She trailed off. "Just for today, it's crowded," and Zoe left her roller skates down there again. "It's just easier." Easier. That was the word. Not safer. Not better. Just easier. I stood there for a moment, hands empty, eyes adjusting to the kitchen light. The windows above the sink were spotless. She always kept them that way. No streaks. No fingerprints. As if she didn't want the world outside to leave its mark. "Of course," I murmured. "Whatever works best." The casserole went into the oven with a quick snap of foil. Not a word of thanks. Just a brisk timer set from Lyanna before she disappeared into the living room I was now unofficially not part of. I could hear the Mark's laughter at the squeak of Zoe's skates on hardwood, a game of charades already underway. Someone guessed penguin and cheers erupted. I stood by the stove. The timer said 29 minutes and counting. I reached for a dish towel and began to wipe the counters. Not because they were dirty. They weren't. But because I needed something to do with my hands. Something that made me useful, or at least not invisible. The refrigerator hummed quietly behind me. On the door, a magnet held up Zoe's artwork from last month, a crayon snowman with stick arms and mismatched buttons. In the corner, she'd scrawled to Nonna. I smiled just a little. Then I noticed the date. December 3rd. That was the last time I'd been here. 3 weeks ago. Before they started finalising plans for the New Year's trip. Before the casual mentions of how remote the cabin was. How limited the bedrooms would be. How they'd to circle back to me once they had a better idea of logistics. They never did. I asked once, a gentle, hopeful, "Do you think there might be space for me?" Mark had looked up from his phone and said, "It's tricky, Mom. The cabin's not really set up for guests who, might need things." Need things. I nodded, said I understood. That I didn't want to complicate anything. And that was that. The oven beeped, but no one came. I pulled the casserole out, set it on the trivet, and stepped back. Still no one. So I waited. Eventually, Lyanna peeked her head in. "Oh, perfect, thanks, I'll dish it up in a bit." And then she was gone again. I stood alone in the warm kitchen that didn't smell like my kitchen. Everything was too quiet despite the noise from the next room. Even the chairs looked uncomfortable. I turned and looked out the window, watching the bare branches sway in the wind. It was supposed to snow again tonight. The kind that lingered, the kind that muffled the whole world. I used to love snow. James and I would take Mark out the moment flakes started to fall. No gear, no fuss. Just boots and layers and a thermos of cocoa in my coat pocket. We'd walk until our eyelashes turned white and our laughter fogged up the cold. But now snow was slippery. Now stairs were too much. Now cabins were not safe for someone your age. And kitchens, even kitchens with your food in their ovens, were just the waiting room for the parts of family life you weren't invited to anymore. I wiped my hands on the towel and folded it carefully over the oven handle. Then I sat at the little stool by the counter and waited, not for inclusion, not even for recognition, but simply for the casserole to be eaten while it was still warm. It started, I suppose, with a staircase. not a grand one. Just the 3 steps down into the sunken living room, the one Lyanna redecorated in creams and greys and accent pillows no one was allowed to lean on. I had barely stepped inside when she looked over my shoulder and said, gently, "Oh, Mom, maybe just stay in the kitchen. Those stairs are steep." I paused, still holding the casserole I'd baked, the kind with the buttery cracker topping Zoe always liked. Mark didn't say anything. He was fiddling with the Bluetooth speaker, trying to sync it to his phone. Lyanna smiled like she was offering a kindness, not a boundary. "We just don't want you to trip." "I won't trip," I said, setting the dish down carefully on the counter. "I've walked those stairs before." "Yes, Bubba." She trailed off. "Just for today. It's crowded, and Zoe left her roller skates down there again. It's just easier." Easier. That was the word. Not safer. Not better. Just easier. I stood there for a moment, hands empty, eyes adjusting to the kitchen light. The windows above the sink were spotless. She always kept them that way. No streaks. No fingerprints. As if she didn't want the world outside to leave its mark. "Of course," I murmured. "Whatever works best." The casserole went into the oven with a quick snap of foil. Not a word of thanks. Just a brisk timer set from Lyanna before she disappeared into the living room I was now unofficially not part of. I could hear Mark's laughter, the squeak of Zoe's skates on hardwood, a game of charades already underway. Someone guessed penguin, and cheers erupted. I stood by the stove. The timer said 29 minutes and counting. I reached for a dish towel and began to wipe the counters. Not because they were dirty. They weren't. But because I needed something to do with my hands. Something that made me useful, or at least not invisible. The refrigerator hummed quietly behind me. On the door, a magnet held up Zoe's artwork from last month, a crayon snowman with stick-ons and mismatched buttons. In the corner, she'd scrawled to Nonna. I smiled just a little. Then I noticed the date. December 3rd. That was the last time I'd been here. 3 weeks ago. Before they started finalising plans for the New Year's trip. Before the casual mentions of how remote the cabin was. How limited the bedrooms would be. How they'd circle back to me once they had a better idea of logistics. They never did. I asked once, so gentle, hopeful, "Do you think there might be space for me?" Mark had looked up from his phone and said, "It's tricky, Mom. The cabin's not really set up for guests who, might need things." Need things. I nodded, said I understood. That I didn't want to complicate anything. And that was that. The oven beeped, but no one came. I pulled the casserole out, set it on the trivet, and stepped back. Still no one. So I waited. Eventually, Lyanna peeked her head in. "Oh, perfect, thanks, I'll dish it up in a bit." And then she was gone again. I stood alone in the warm kitchen that didn't smell like my kitchen. Everything was too quiet despite the noise from the next room. Even the chairs looked uncomfortable. I turned and looked out the window, watching the bare branches sway in the wind. It was supposed to snow again tonight. The kind that lingered, the kind that muffled the whole world. I used to love snow. Jims and I would take Mark out the moment flakes started to fall. No gear, no fuss. Just boots and layers and a thermos of cocoa in my coat pocket. We'd walk until our eyelashes turned white and our laughter fucked up the cold. But now snow was slippery. Now stairs were too much. Now cabins were not safe for someone your age. And kitchens, even kitchens with your food in their ovens, were just the waiting room for the parts of family life you weren't invited to anymore. I wiped my hands in the towel and folded it carefully over the oven handle. Then I sat at the little stool by the counter and waited, not for inclusion, not even for recognition, but simply for the casserole to be eaten while it was still warm. I wake up before the sun, like always. It's not insomnia. Not exactly. It's habit, the kind your body keeps even when the world around you forgets you exist. The house is quiet, still dressed in the hush of post-holiday emptiness. The living room is dark, except for the blinking light and the answering machine, just a reminder that no one calls anymore. I cross the kitchen floor in slippers older than Zoe. The linoleum's cracked by the sink, and I always mean to call someone to fix it, but then I think, who would I be fixing it for? I boil water. 1 cup. Always the same mug. Pale blue with a chip on the handle. It used to be part of a set. Now it's just the one. Like me, I make toast I don't finish. Half buttered, half forgotten. I read the paper cover to cover even though I already know the news from my phone. The pages feel good in my hands. Real. Solid. Not like the scrolling world that moves too fast and leaves no room for stillness. By 8:0 a.m. I fed the neighbourhood cat. He's not mine, but he stops by each morning like we have a standing appointment. I call him Charlie, though I'm sure he has another name somewhere else. We have silent conversations. He blinks. I nod. He eats. I water the plants. Wipe the counters. Fold the same towels I folded yesterday. It's not that they need it. It's that I need it. Something to mark the hours. The phone buzzes once, a pharmacy reminder. I delete it. Nothing from Mark. Nothing from Lyanna. Not even a forwarded meme from Zoe. She used to send me videos of otters. Now I'm lucky if I get tagged in a group post once a month. A few years ago, I was always on someone's list of errands, pickups, school plays, potlucks. I made cookies for big sales, hemmed costumes for dance recitals, hosted Thanksgiving twice in 1 decade. But lately, it's like I've been written out of the script. Softly. Quietly. Not with cruelty. Just a mission. I used to get calls for dinner invites. Now I get leftovers. Frozen ones labelled in neat handwriting. Spinach lasagna, bake at 375. I used to babysit. Now they have a girl from the app. She's young, with hair the colour of sunflower oil and a voice that always sounds amused. Last time I saw her, she greeted me like I was Zoe's grandmother, not her boss's mother. As if she didn't know my name. And maybe she doesn't. I went to the store last Thursday. Wore my nicest coat. The cashier called me sweetie and asked if I needed help carrying my bag. It wasn't heavy. I've carried heavier. Babies. Brief. The weight of long marriages and longer silences. But I let her help because I didn't want to be the woman who insists. No one listens to that woman. Back home, I organised the mail. 4 catalogues, 2 bills, 1 card from a charity I never donated to. No letters. No notes. Nothing in anyone's handwriting. Just barcodes and scanned fonts pretending to be personal. I reheated the lasagna that night. It was dry. Too much cheese. I ate 2 bites, then scraped the rest into the compost bin. The kitchen smelled like garlic and resignation. I lit a candle just to have something flicker. I don't cry. Not anymore. The tears dried up a while ago, like a creek that used to hum under the bridge but now just gathers dust and memory. Instead, I clean. Dust the shelves. Line up the photo frames. Wipe the smudges off glass that no one else ever looks through. There's a portrait of James by the fireplace. I talk to him sometimes. Not like a ghost, I don't believe in that, but like memory as shape and sound, and I just miss the echo. He'd tell me to call Mark. I can hear his voice soft and steady. Just call him. He probably doesn't realise how long it's been. But I won't. Because it's not about memory. It's about choice. And when someone stops choosing you, calling them only teaches them you'll keep showing up anyway. So I don't. I finish my tea and set the cup in the sink. I don't bother rinsing it. I like seeing it there. Proof that I existed in the kitchen that day. New Year's Eve comes quietly. No invitation. No message. Just the sudden knowledge that they've gone. I hear it in the silence. And in the air that presses cold against the window panes like it's trying to remind me of something or maybe warn me. I put on my thickest socks, wrap James's scarf around my shoulders, and pull out the blanket Zoe always loved. The green one with the gold threads. The one I crocheted during the winter James got sick. I don't light a fire. I just sit on the couch and listen to the soft tick of the clock and the occasional pop of fireworks in the distance. At midnight, I lift a glass of warm cider to no one. There's no resolution. No countdown. Just the sound of a year folding in on itself quietly, gently, like paper you can't smooth out again. I whisper, Happy New Year. No one answers. And yet it's the most honest celebration I've had in years. I wasn't always the forgotten one. There was a time not so long ago in my bones, even if the calendar disagrees, when my name meant comfort. When my presence was assumed, not negotiated. When I didn't have to ask to be included because everything started with me. It was New Year's Eve, 1993. Mark was 10, his cheeks still soft, his knees always scraped from whatever tree or ditch had called his name that week. We were at the cabin of the original one, the small place James's brother sold his first home after his divorce. It smelled like pine and wet wool, and the floorboards creaked in the way that made the house feel alive. I can still see the snow piled high on the deck railing, a crooked snowman outside with one eye missing, a fire burning so hot we had to crack a window even though the wind howled like it had escaped to settle. Mark had built a fort in the corner of the living room out of couch cushions and sleeping bags. He called it his den of secrets. Inside were a flashlight, 3 paperbacks he never finished, and a box of my oatmeal cookies hidden from James with a handwritten note for den use only. James was in the kitchen then, humming off-key to Sinatra while stirring chili in a heavy-bottomed pot. He always claimed chili was his domain, though I made the spice mix. That was the rule. I was starting cranberries onto a string with Mark, our fingers sticky and red. We were going to hang them outside for the birds. He had this habit of talking non-stop when he was focused, and that night he told me everything, how Becky Miller had smiled at him at recess, how he thought he might be brave enough to ask her to sit next to him at lunch after the break. "Do you think I'm interesting, Mom?" he asked suddenly. I paused, holding a needle in midair. "Interesting?" "Yeah, like worth sitting next to." I set the cranberries down, took his hand in mine, and said, "You're the most interesting person I've ever known." He looked surprised, then proud. And for a moment, I swear the whole room leaned in the cabin, the wind, the fire, just to let him hold that feeling a little longer. At midnight, we all went outside, bundled in layers and boots, with sparklers in our hands and joy in our breath. We lit them one by one, sparks casting golden light on our faces, on the snow, on the old fence we never repaired. James kissed my cheek and whispered, "Still standing, Marion." "Another year." I whispered it back. "Still standing." We didn't have much, not money, not prestige, but we had warmth. We had place. And that place was me. I was the keeper of cocoa, of bedtime stores, of packed lunches and stitched knees and holiday lists written in careful cursive. I was the one who made sure the gifts were wrapped and labelled, that batteries were included, that everyone got their favourite side dish. I was the centre. And now? Now I'm the note on the counter. The frozen tray. The afterthought with a polite maybe next year. I don't know when it changed. There was no moment and no argument, no scene. Just a slow erosion, like water against stone. Tiny grains of presence carried off until all that remained was a shape where I used to be. Maybe it was when Mark got the new job, or when Lyanna started calling the shots on holidays, or when Zoe outgrew lap hugs and bedtime stores. Maybe it was one thing. Maybe it was the accumulation of small forgettings. Once I was the woman who held the flashlight during storms, who kept the world from tipping. Now they assume I break on stairs. They don't remember that I built fires in the dark with nothing but newspaper and grit. That I held a crying boy through croup and heartache. That I once hiked 5 miles through snow to a payphone when James slipped on the ice and broke his leg. That I'm not made of glass. I am made of mountain. But they've stopped seeing that. And now the contrast feels sharp, and not because I want to be needed in the same way. I know my hands are slower. I know my knees sing louder than they used to. But I still carry the weight of every birthday cake, every check written, every night I stayed up with a thermometer and a prayer. I carry it all. And still they see me as fragile. Like winter air in a warm car, something to keep outside. On New Year's Day, I lit a candle. Not for any particular reason. Just habit. James and I used to start each year with one a small white pillar lit at dawn, let to burn until dusk. To bring in the light, he'd say, as if it were something you could summon. As if warmth answered to flame. The sky outside was grey and low, pressing against the windows like it wanted in. I wrapped myself in the green cardigan, the one Zoe gave me 3 Christmases ago, back when she still thought I was the kind of person you gave things to, not the one you delegated chores around. I made breakfast. 2 eggs, toast, coffee brewed just how I like it. And for the first time in days, I set 2 places at the table. The second one stayed empty, of course. But I needed the illusion. Something about seeing another plate made me feel not quite alone. I imagined James across from me, newspaper in hand, reading aloud every other sentence like he always did, punctuating headlines with jokes only I ever laughed at. I ate slowly, savoured each bite. Let the quiet be a companion instead of a verdict. And then, almost without realising, I reached for my phone. There had been a missed call sometime around midnight. No voicemail. Just a number I didn't recognise and no follow-up. I stared at it for a while before swiping it away. Likely a wrong number or a telemarketer who didn't understand time zones. But there, just beneath it, a message from Mark. Sent at 1:13 a.m. Happy New Year, Mom. Hope you're staying warm. We'll call tomorrow. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Tomorrow. That single word bloomed inside me like heat after a long walk in the cold. A call. A real one. His voice. Maybe Zoe too. Maybe they'd tell me about the cabin or wherever they really were. Maybe they'd say it had all been a misunderstanding. That they missed me. That they'd saved me something. I left the phone on the counter, volume turned all the way up. And for the first time in days, I opened the curtains wide. I dusted the shelf above the fireplace. Rearranged the pillows in the couch. Even pulled out a photo album from the hutch and set it on the coffee table, the one with the thick leather cover and the gold trim that's worn to soft bronze with time. Just in case Zoe wanted to look through it with me on video. I even considered baking something. I hadn't baked in weeks, so what was the point? But today felt different. I pulled out the flour, the sugar, the mixing bowl with the chipped rim. My hands moved without instruction. A phone call. That's all it was. But it was enough. At noon, I checked the battery. Still full. By 2, I moved the phone closer to the window, better reception. By 5, I turned off the radio so I wouldn't miss the ringtone. By 7, I made tea, just to have something warm in my hands. By 8, I turned on the porch light. I don't know why. They weren't coming. But hope, real hope, doesn't always know when to go home. It lingers. Like steam on a mirror. At 9, I opened the phone again. No new messages. I scrolled back to the one from work. You read it. We'll call tomorrow. I told myself it was still tomorrow. Technically. Until midnight it was still the same day. Still possible. Still pending. I waited. At 10:15 I gave in and opened social media. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to distract myself. Maybe to look at something other than the clock face with its stubborn hands. So he had posted a story. A short video. 10 seconds. She was in a cabin. Wood-panelled walls. Fire crackling in the hearth behind her. Laughter echoing faintly in the background. She wore fuzzy socks and held a mug that looked suspiciously like the one I gave her last year of navy blue with gold stars. In the corner of the frame, someone in Mark, I think it was dancing to a song I didn't recognise. The caption read, Family Vibes. Family. I stared at that word until the screen blurred. In the background, just barely visible, was a corner of the green and gold blanket. The one I'd crocheted. The one I hadn't seen since Christmas. The room in the video looked warm. Crowded. Bright. There were at least a dozen people there. Plates in hand. Glasses raised. One of the cousins, maybe Lioness side, clinked a toast and shouted it to new beginnings. I watched it again. And again. And with each loop, the warmth that had kindled in me earlier flickered lower, dimmer, until it felt like a trick of the light. So that's where they were. Not somewhere inaccessible, rickety cabin by the lake. Not somewhere unsafe. Just somewhere I wasn't invited. I closed the app. Turned off the porch light. The room darkened again. I didn't cry. Not exactly. But I did stand there for a long time, staring at the candle I'd lit that morning. Its flame was still burning, small but steady, the wax pulled around its base. I watched it flicker. Then I leaned in and blew it out. I don't know what time I went to bed that night. I just remember sitting in the dark long after the candle had gone out, long after the tea went cold in my hands, and thinking, so this is it. Not the drama of slamming doors or shouted accusations. Just fading. Being slowly folded out of the picture. Like the corner of a photograph that curls and yellows until someone tears it off to make the frame fit better. There was a time when my voice filled rooms. When Mark used to shout Mom from 2 blocks away just to make sure I saw him waving. When Zoe used to race down the hall to show me her drawings, stick figures with hair like wire, all of us holding hands. Now I'm the person who gets tagged by accident. Who gets forgotten on the group text, then added late, too late, with a sorry thought you were already on it. I'm the last plate cleared. The last minute call if the babysitter cancels. The filler seat. The quiet one in the kitchen who's always smiling, always nodding, always saying, "It's fine, I understand," even when I don't. Especially when I don't. But at night, alone in my bed with the ticking clock and the weight of silence pressing like snow on an old roof, something shifted. It wasn't pain. That would have been easier. It was tiredness. A kind of tired that lives in your bones, in your breath. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling fan I hadn't dusted since Thanksgiving, and not because I couldn't, but because I'd hoped they'd notice. I'd hoped someone might say, "Mom, let me get that for you," or "You shouldn't have to reach up there." But they hadn't. And I hadn't asked. That's what gets you in the end, not the lack of love, but the quiet resignation that follows it. The way you stop asking, stop reminding, stop offering suggestions for how you might fit into the corners of their busy lives. Because you already know. There's no corner left. I thought about calling Mark. Really calling him. Not to scold, not to cry, just to hear his voice. Just to say I saw the video, it looked lovely. Just to hear what he'd say back. But I didn't. Because I knew what I'd hear, guilt thick with distraction. Maybe a soft "oh, Mom," followed by a quick excuse. It wasn't planned, or we thought it'd be too hard on you. Too hard. As if the hardest part wasn't watching them enjoy warmth I'd been told didn't exist. I turned over in bed. The sheets were cold. Even the cat hadn't come tonight. That's when it hit me I wasn't just alone. I was unnecessary. Not unloved. That's too clean a word. I believe, somewhere, they still love me in the abstract. In the way you love an old book you haven't opened in years, or a song that reminds you of something you can't place. They love the idea of me. The comfort of my existence. But not the weight of it. Not the reality of my voice in a room. My hands in the mix. My presence in the middle, where it used to be. Now I'm the echo they've learned to live without. I rolled onto my back and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. What happens when you stop mattering? When you become background? I used to be the first person they called. For advice, for comfort, for help with school projects and emergency babysitting and what to do when the engine light comes on. I used to be the person who remembered birthdays, who made soup from scratch when someone had a cold, who stayed up all night knitting a scarf because Mark's old one just wasn't warm enough. Now they wear that same scarf in a photo they didn't know I'd see. And smile. Not even a trace of guilt in their faces. Because they've trained themselves not to miss me. And I've let them. That's what hurts the most. I let them. I made it too easy to forget me. Too comfortable to exclude me. I smoothed the path, padded the corners, dimmed my own voice so theirs could be louder. And in doing so, I disappeared. The silence that night wasn't cruel. It was absolute. Not angry. Just final. A closed chapter, a dim room, a song no one hums anymore. I think that's when I truly hit bottom. Not when I saw the photos. Not even when I realised the scarf, the blanket, the mug, all pieces of me were there without me. It was that moment in bed, eyes open, breath shallow, realising that I didn't know how to be needed anymore. I didn't even know if I wanted to be. I just knew I couldn't keep waiting at the edges of other people's joy, hoping for crumbs. Not anymore. I woke before dawn. Not from rest. I hadn't slept. Not really. I drifted in and out of something like sleep, shallow, cold, the kind where you're always half listening for a sound that never comes. The house was still. Even the refrigerator seemed quieter than usual, as though it too was holding its breath. I didn't reach for the light. Instead, I lay still, eyes open to the faint greyness of morning sliding beneath the curtains. The familiar outline of my dresser. The lamp with the chip base. James's watch, still in the nightstand, though the battery stopped years ago. I'd never replaced it. Time had kept going. I just hadn't needed it to. The silence felt different this time. Not heavy. Not hollow. Just honest. And in that honesty, something stirred. Not anger, I'd passed that miles back. Not sadness either, that had dried into something quieter, like ash after the fire. This was something else. A kind of clarity. I'd given them every chance. Every grace. Every benefit of every doubt. I'd waited, stepped aside, smiled when I was disappointed, said of course when what I meant was how could you. I'd watched myself become less necessary. And I had let it happen. But lying there in the blue hush of early morning, I realised something I hadn't dared name before. I'm still here. I'm still breathing. I still wake with memories in my bones and years ahead of me, whether they care or not. And I don't want to spend them folded small in corners, waiting for someone to remember I used to be a centerpiece. James's voice floated up from some place deep inside, and not the sound, exactly, but a memory dressed as sound. You don't let them shrink you, Mare, you're the mountain, not the snowflake. He used to say that when the world made me small, when the pitiation of me, when the landlord laughed at my questions, when I was just a tired woman trying to do everything right and still being told I was wrong. You were the mountain, not the snowflake. Back then, I thought he meant I was stubborn, strong-willed, and movable. But no, I think he meant you've been here all along. You don't vanish just because someone stops looking. I turned toward the window and watched as the first thread of gold touched the rooftops. The trees, bare and brittle, caught the light and shimmered like glass. I whispered aloud just to hear it. This can't be the rest of this story. It wasn't a plan. I hadn't figured anything out yet. I didn't know where I'd go or what I'd do. I didn't even know what change would look like. But I knew one thing with more certainty than I'd felt in years. I was done waiting. Done explaining. Done making myself easy to ignore. I didn't get out of bed right away. I stayed curled beneath the quilt James and I bought at the county fair 37 years ago, the one with the faded stitching and the sun-shaped patch on one corner. But something had shifted. Something in my spine straightened. Not from pride. From resolve. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. About reclaiming space I'd spent too long giving away. About standing in the middle of my own life again, even if the room is quiet, even if the chair across from me stays empty. Even if no one notices. Especially if no one notices. Because that's the moment, isn't it? When you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. The sun had climbed a little higher by the time I swung my legs out of bed. There was no announcement, no triumphant soundtrack. Just the soft whisper of slippers brushing against the carpet and the creak of spine not used to carrying its own weight like this anymore. I made coffee. Strong black, no sugar. Poured it into the good mug of the one I kept high on the shelf for guests. There hadn't been guests in months. It tasted bitter. Alive. I sat at the table in my robe and stared at the screen of my phone for a long time. The messages were still there, old emojis, group chats I wasn't really part of, photos from a trip I hadn't been invited on. I didn't delete anything. But I didn't open them either. Instead, I tapped open the travel app. It was still on my home screen, tucked between the weather and the notepad. I used it once a year, if that. Usually to check Zoe's flight details when she visited in the summer. But today I typed something new. Echo Lake. Cabins. 2 nights. I watched the options load. Some were too big a party rentals, sleeping 10 or more. Some were too remote dirt roads that vanished under snow by December. But then I saw it. A restored stone cottage tucked just outside of town. Lake view. Wood-burning stove. 1 bedroom, 1 bath. Simple, beautiful, private. There were photos, a clawfoot tub, thick blankets folded at the foot of a handmade bed, windows that framed the lake like a painting. A kitchen with real dishes, not vacation rental cast-offs. A small table with 2 chairs. Enough for company or for one person who refuses to disappear. The price made me pause. It was extravagant, but it wasn't cheap either. But then I thought of the scarf in the photo. The mug. The blanket on their couch. All parts of me that were welcomed without me. And I thought no more. I tapped to book now. Filled in my details. Clicked to confirm. The confirmation screen blinked, then settled. It was done. I'd be leaving tomorrow. 2 nights. Just for me. No invitation. No coordination. No compromise. Just choice. My choice. I set the phone down gently as if it were something sacred. And then slowly, carefully I packed. Not a full suitcase. Just a weekend bag, worn leather, the one James gave me on our 20th anniversary with my initials embossed in the corner. Inside I placed my favourite sweater. The one I rarely wear because it's too nice for the house. A book of Mary Oliver poems. My grandmother's postcard tin. Still half full. A thermos for tea. One photograph of James and I on our first winter trip to the cabin. He's holding a snow shovel and grinning like he knows something I don't. And one small box of matches. For the fire. For the ritual. I didn't call anyone. Didn't text. Let them think I was still here, quietly stewing in my small kitchen, waiting for a belated phone call or an afterthought apology. Let them believe what they wanted. They'd made their choices. And now I was making mine. That afternoon I walked to the post office. Not out of habit. On purpose. I pulled one of the watercolour postcards from the tin, soft snow, a pale sky, a single window glowing gold. And I wrote in careful script. Heard it was too cold for me. Turns out it's beautiful here. I didn't sign it. Didn't need to. The handwriting would be enough. I addressed it to the house. To Mark and Diana and Zoe and the rest of the family vibes. I dropped it in a box and walked home without looking back. Back at the house I tidied a few things. Folded the throw blanket. Watered the plant by the window. Left the casserole in the fridge. Then I sat in the armchair by the fire, a blanket around my shoulders, the travel details printed and folded beside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt something light come. Not because I'd solved anything. Not because the pain had vanished. But because I had stopped asking for space in other people's plans. And started making room in my own. The road to the cabin curved gently, lined with bare limb trees that reached toward the sky like quiet witnesses. The snow had settled thick along the shoulders, but the path was clear ploughed recently, faithfully. Someone had prepared for company. I parked beneath a crooked pine. The wind was sharp but dry, the kind that stung your cheeks but made you feel alive again. I stepped out slowly, savouring the crunch of boots on snow, the smell of wood smoke from somewhere nearby. The key was in a lockbox beside the door. The cabin in my cabin was even lovelier in person. Few stone walls, shutters painted a faded red, a small porch with a single rocking chair. Not grand, not modern, but solid. Mine. Inside the air held the scent of cedar and ash. The firewood had already been stacked by the hearth. A note on the table read, "Welcome, Marian, enjoy your stay." No one had ever welcomed me by name like that. Not in years. I unpacked slowly, setting things where I wanted. The sweater over the chair. The book on the nightstand. The photograph of James leaned gently against the mantel. I built a fire the old way, kindling first, stacked in a teepee. 2 pieces of birch, 1 log of oak, and pages torn from the travel brochure I'd found in the glove compartment. The flame took its time, but it came. Strong. Steady. I poured tea into my thermos and sat in the chair closest to the fire, legs tucked beneath me, blanket across my lap. Outside the window, the lake was still. Frozen, but not lifeless. I watched the light shift across the ice for a long time. It felt like hours, though I didn't check the clock. Time had loosened its grip on me. I was where I needed to be. And then, just before sunset, I stood. I reached for the small photo I'd taken on my phone earlier, a picture of the cabin, the lake in the background, my shadow stretching along across the snow. I printed it from the little pocket printer Zoe gave me years ago, back when she still thought I might want to scrapbook. I took my time framing it. A small wooden frame I bought with me. Nothing fancy. Just clean lines, smooth grain. On the bottom edge, I wrote 2 words in my niece's cursive. Still standing. Then I did the final thing. The quiet gesture. The one no one would see, but that would mean everything. That night, before I turned in, I bundled up once more, tucking the scarf around my throat the way James used to do for me when I was too proud to admit I was cold. I stepped outside and placed the postcard, the one I'd mailed 2 days ago, on the welcome mat. The wind hadn't taken it. The ink hadn't smudged. It sat there, quiet and sure, waiting to be found. I didn't ring the bell. They didn't knock. I just stood for a moment, looking at the house where I had once been central, the kitchen window, the dent in the mailbox, the porch light they always left on. Then I turned and walked back to the car. Not because I was leaving, but because I had already arrived elsewhere, somewhere warmer. Somewhere that no one gave me permission to be. I had taken it. And that, more than anything, was the goodbye. Not bitter. Not loud. Just a final full stop. The end of waiting. The end of asking. The beginning of being. The morning of the second day, I woke to sunlight spilling across the wooden floor, soft, golden, and utterly quiet. No voices. No rush. No list of things I was behind on. Just warmth. I stayed in bed a while, the quilt pulled high, the scent of last night's fire still clinging gently to the air. Outside, the lake had caught the light in frozen ripples, glittering as if it too had something to say. Eventually, I rose, made coffee, toasted a thick slice of bread, sat by the window and watched a family of birds flit between branches of busy, bright little things, unaware of what I had left behind. It wasn't regret. Not anymore. It was space. And in that space, I could finally breathe without wondering who I was disappointing by existing. After breakfast, I pulled on my boots and coat and walked down the slope toward the lake's edge. The wind pressed gently at my back, like James used to do when we walked into town, and not to rush me, just to remind me he was there. The surface of the lake was a glassy blue-white untouched. I stood at the edge for a while, my hands tucked in my pockets, watching the clouds stretch wide across the sky. There were no footprints in the snow behind me. No watchers. No audience. Just me. And yet I didn't feel alone. Not in the hollow way. In the whole way. Complete. I sat on a large, flat stone near the shore. It was cold, but it steadied me. The kind of cold that clarifies things. That says you're alive and you're still here. I took out my notebook, a small one, soft leather, pages half full of grocery lists and old reminders. I turned to a clean page. And I wrote, I am not the sum of who remembers me. It came out easy. True. And then, beneath it, I do not have to be chosen to matter. There was no plan for what I'd do next. I wasn't plotting reunions or confrontations. I didn't need anyone to feel bad. I didn't need them to chase me down the road apologizing. I didn't even need them to understand. What I needed, I had already found over here in the hush of snow and firelight, in the way the morning found my face without being asked. I thought again of the photo I'd taken of me in front of the cabin, smelling, hand wrapped around a mug, fire behind me, nothing performative. Just presence. I would frame it when I got home. I'd hang it in the hallway. Not to prove anything, but to remind myself on quiet days what it means to return to yourself. Later, I walked through the town square. Bought a scone from the bakery. The woman behind the counter complimented my scarf, James's scarf, and asked if I was visiting from the city. I smiled and said something like that. She gave me an extra napkin without being asked. Small kindnesses feel different when you're not waiting for them. Back at the cabin, I lit the fire again. It caught fast this time, like it remembered me. I sat with my tea, notebook in my lap, and looked out the window. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't wonder who might be thinking of me. I didn't replay old conversations or worry about what I should have said when they left me behind. I simply sat and felt the stillness fill with something new. Not loneliness, but freedom. And that, more than any apology, was a gift I hadn't known I needed, because they said it was too cold for me. But I was never the one frozen.